So let's start with our narrator, whose name is Nick. What is his last name? Anybody remember? Carraway. Do you suppose that that's accidental? Well, I've strongly suggested that nothing is. So the fact that his name is Carraway could strongly suggest that he doesn't care about things or is unaffected by cares about things, and or commonly that he is privileged enough not to have the cares of the regular poor people that we sort of run into tangentially in the novel. So the quote that I've put on here is from the very, very beginning. He's sort of introducing himself, and he's explaining to us why he makes a good narrator for this story. He doesn't phrase it that way, but in consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. So, why is it important that he has this characteristic? He's not judgy, and as a result of that, people tend to open up to him. People tend to spill their secrets to him. Why does he tell us that right up front, Abby?
The main character and the viewpoint character, and that way the audience gets to know what's going on through him, sort of.
So this, he is the narrator, and I would say arguably not the main character. But it's not clear ever, and it's certainly not clear yet. It's hard for the person whose point of view we're telling the story through not to be the main character of a story, right? That's the convention. But it does happen. So the book is entitled The Great Gatsby, and we're learning about Gatsby, although in the first 3 chapters we haven't learned much yet, but we are learning about him through someone else. And this is unusual, and it's part of what makes the book interesting. I'm going to use the word protagonist rather than main character, because it's a bit more specific here. Main character is perhaps a bit vague, but protagonist can be clearly explained, the hero of the story. So is Nick the hero of this story? Perhaps. That is, I'm going to suggest, at best debatable. Now, what is it about this, his being a receptacle for people's secrets, that is important to tell us right up front? Think in terms of the structure of the story. Normally is perhaps the wrong word here, but bear with me. Your narrator is normally omniscient, right? They can see all things. Your narrator is normally unbiased, right? Your narrator is impersonal. if they're not part of the story themselves, they're impersonal and they're unbiased. So what enters into it when the narrator is part of the story is that perhaps they are biased, but they don't know everything, right? Your standard, if you will, narrator knows all of it. They might not tell the reader all of that all at once, but they know all of it, right? Nick doesn't know all of it, but he's telling us that people always tell him their secrets. So he knows enough of it to be able to tell the story. So he knows enough of Tom's secrets and Daisy's secrets and Gatsby's secrets and in fact Jordan's secrets as well. He knows enough about everybody that he's able to put the story together. The story being told from the point of view of one of the other characters would not be able to tie together as well because none of them have as much of the story as Nick does. So this makes him limited in knowledge, but not too limited. Makes him the ideal choice as a narrator. Now, from the point of view of story structure, Fitzgerald sets us up with this right off the bat, right? He starts right into the story with, I'm not a very judgmental fellow, and people like to share their things with me. So he's telling us right away that either this guy is a reliable narrator as far as he's able to know of things, or he's telling us that this guy is a supreme liar. Now, it's most likely that he's telling us that that Nick is a reliable narrator, and there's not much in the story that really makes us think that he isn't. But there are many stories, and I say stories rather than novels because I'm thinking of short stories in particular here, in which the narrator is unreliable. So think, for example, of a story that's told from the point of view of a child. And you've all read some of these. Now, you've probably all read many of them. Now, try to think of a time when you, as the reader, understood something that was going on that the child who's telling the story did not understand. You know what I'm talking about? So the narrator is reporting something that they see or hear to us. They don't understand it, but we understand it, right? That's what's called an unreliable narrator. Sometimes the narrator is biased in a way that should be fairly obvious to the reader, depending on the level of sophistication of that work of literature. All of that can add something to the story. Sometimes the narrator is clearly lying to us in some stories, and we may come to some examples of this in this semester. But what Fitzgerald is telling us here is that you don't have to worry about that here. Your narrator is just a guy, but he's a very trustworthy and non-judgmental guy. So he's going to give you a fair account of everything that happens. We take it from the title of the book, The Great Gatsby, that his account is mostly going to be about what happens with this guy, Gatsby. Other observations on Nick. What do we find about his his character, his disposition in the first 3 chapters. Robin?
He seems laid back, like he might go with anything.
Yeah, it's that Carraway thing, right? So he is very laid back. Goes along with things. Do we get the sense that he likes Tom very much? No, he doesn't really have anything nice to say about Tom, and yet somehow he spends the whole day with Tom meeting Tom's girlfriend and stuff and getting drunk with these people that he doesn't know. So he just kind of goes along with things. Now, is this an important characteristic for him as a person? I would suggest maybe not, but it is an important characteristic for him as a narrator, right? Because if he wasn't so easygoing and inclined to go along with things and try not to judge, then he wouldn't have got all that juicy stuff about Myrtle and Tom and George and all of that, right? So he wouldn't know any of that. So we need him to be this kind of guy in order for him to know the sorts of things that he can know to tell us the story. Do you ever think about story writing on that level of depth before? Most people have not. So what I'm suggesting to you here is that we can already tell, aside from Fitzgerald's obvious mastery of the language, like he knows English, right? He can put together words in a very poetic and literary way. But he's certainly got a mastery of story structure to match that. Anything else that we want to question or mention about Nick?